Shumaker interview. So
Gotcha.
so
Sure. All right. Second slate, Bob Shumaker interview, take 3.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to just go through this stuff briefly, and a lot of this will be cutting away from you.
Understand.
Okay. So just tell me about the Lone Sailor Award.
In 2016, I was awarded an award called the Lone Sailor Award, and it's quite an event. It's sponsored by the Navy Museum here in Washington, D.C., and it's a black tie event at a very famous museum called the National Building Museum. And the whole idea is, and it's given to 2 or 3 people a year, and these people are selected by a committee as having been beneficially impacted by their experience in the maritime services, the Coast Guard, Navy, Marine Corps. And so my group had 3 people. One was an industrialist named Dan Daniello, and another was Senator John Glenn, who unfortunately has passed away since then, and I was the recipient of it. So it was a nice event, and I'm proud of the award.
Wonderful. And just mention something. Today you have a tractor, but that's not the first time you've had a tractor or driven one.
Well, even when I was a kid, I used to play around in the sand with toy tractors, and then having grown up on a dairy farm, I used to operate tractors, a Farmall and an Oliver tractor, and then when we built our house, my wife and I built our house. It was on 8 acres, and so you really need a tractor to get around and haul stuff. And so I bought this old Ford tractor, Ford Jubilee it was called, and it was a wonderful machine, but it didn't have hydraulics on it. So eventually I bought this Kubota, and it has a front lift on it and a rear lift that's driven by power takeoff. So I use it sometimes for cutting grass and for hauling stuff around. And then I had a near accident with the thing once when I was hauling some wood in the front end of it. And
we have that one.
Okay, good. I'll skip.
Thank you. And then just mention in part, you were a pilot in the Navy, and you still fly today.
Right. Well, I decided to go into naval aviation after graduating from the Naval Academy, and flew T-34s and T-28s and TVs and things, and eventually moved into the F-8 Crusaders, which is a fighter, single-engine, single-seat fighter. And apparently aviation gets in your blood, and even though I'm 85 years old, I still fly. And I was reading a magazine or periodical about how you can build your own airplane. So this happened about 15 years ago. I built it's called a Glass Air. Gets its name from being mostly made out of fiberglass, but it's a 2-seater, fully acrobatic, and it's a good cross-country airplane. So I've flown it from Washington, D.C. With my wife up to Alaska, and we've flown it to the Bahamas. So it's a hobby that I still enjoy.
Wonderful. And when you were released from Hanoi, you flew home to the States. You were anticipating seeing your wife and son for the first time. Tell me about any special requests you made and what it was like when your son and wife greeted you.
Well, we finally got released in February of 1973. And when I say we, 1/3 of them did, and then another third came a month later, and another third a month after that. But they flew us to Clark Air Force Base, which is located in the Philippines, and I was able to reach my wife, who lived in San Diego, by telephone. And the way she tells the story is, it just sounded like I'd left the day before and I hadn't changed much. But in our absence, the culture in the United States had gone through a fashion change in which young ladies wore miniskirts. And a lot of us lamented the fact that we missed that whole era. So in my telephone call to my wife, I said, hey, when you meet us in San Diego, would you wear a mini skirt? And so she obliged. And she tells the story about how she asked her son, who was then almost 9 years old, what he was going to do when he first saw his father, because the last I had seen him when he was when he was 3 weeks old. And he was a kind of a bashful a guy, and he just kind of shrugged his shoulders and didn't really respond. And so my wife, Lorraine, said, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to run up there and give him a big hug. And he apparently took that on board. So when the airplane landed and I came walking down the staircase there, he broke loose from my wife and dashed. He was a competitive guy. Wanted to beat her to me, and he did. He jumped in my arms, and I think we have a photograph that shows him jumping up.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Let's see. Oh, there's you have a flagpole on your property today, but that's goes back in the family tradition of raising the flag. Can you tell me something about that?
Well, I grew up in a town, actually on a farm in western Pennsylvania, and my father, I'm told, every day during my captivity would raise an American flag there. And so I'm trying, he's now deceased, but I try to keep the tradition up by having that flagpole at my house, and it gets raised with great pride. And I ought to inject at this time that, you know, the POWs are treated with a lot of honor, I suppose, even 50 years after their experience. But, you know, who doesn't really, the people that don't get treated with great recognition and really deserve to be are our families, and particularly our wives. And so my wife was only 21 years old when I got shot down, and she raised her son and did a great job doing that, and stuck with me. And we're celebrating now our 54th year of marriage.
Wow. I'm so moved by that. And then there's a photo that I've certainly seen in my studies of a famous photo of your capture photo. Can you describe that?
Well, when we go into battle as a jet fighter pilot, we carry a lot of stuff. You know, we have knives and pistols, and we wear kind of a vest. It's called a torso vest, and it's got inflatable bladders in there and survival equipment, shark repellent, and stuff like that. So when I was shot down, I had all this stuff on me. In fact, so did John McCain when he was later shot down, and this caused him to sink to the bottom of this 15-foot lake. But I landed on the land and still had this stuff on me. And this photograph that you refer to is of the Vietnamese capturing me, and I still have my torso vest on.
And there's another famous photo of you in 3 or 4 of your other fellow POWs. There's a soldier on the left side with a bayonet, and you're being paraded through the streets. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, after I was captured, I was forced in front of a firing squad. I don't think that's the picture you're relating to, though. One picture is of a parade that the Vietnamese decided to have in 1966, and they got us all handcuffed aside with a partner and marches. I think there were about 35 or so of us marching down through the middle of Hanoi with civilians throwing stones at us, and guards supposedly trying to keep the civilians from getting to us, but they let them through to beat us over the head. And it was a rough night, and they eventually, this went on for a couple of miles, I think, and then we got into a sports stadium. I didn't think we were going to make it. You know, I thought we would be beaten to death. But the Vietnamese photographed this thing and used it as propaganda. They announced it to the world, and it backfired on them as a propaganda stunt because people realized that they weren't abiding by the Geneva Conventions and that they were brutalizing the POWs.
I'm going to step over and hand you the bracelet.
Okay.
Maybe you can describe.
Where to put it? Oh, yeah, okay.
There it is.
You bet, yeah.
And can you pick that up?
Yes. Also, Patrick read his.
Okay, great, thank you. Tell me about the bracelets and about your son.
Right. Well, I'm holding a bracelet that one of several million that was sold during the war for about $2. And the whole concept was started by two college students in Los Angeles, I believe, who approached their professor with this idea that they would manufacture these bracelets, and they're kind of inexpensively made, but on them they have the name of a POW and the date that POW was shot down. And after paying your $2 and getting your bracelet, the individual made a pledge that they wouldn't take the bracelet off until they knew the fate of the individual whose name was on the bracelet. So I think the initial load of these things was only a couple hundred or so, and they sold like hotcakes, and they kept manufacturing more of them. And so the whole intent was to focus the attention of the American public on how their American POWs were being treated, and keep that uppermost in their mind to try to get them released. So, you think young people don't have good ideas. Well, these two college girls showed otherwise, and I'm very much indebted to them because the Vietnamese apparently were very moved by this, knowing that the American public was supportive of releasing the POWs. In fact, earlier, Admiral Stockdale used to tell the story about how during an interrogation, the Vietnamese interrogator had said, "Stockdale, we're going to win this war, and we realize we can't win it on the battlefield, but we're going to win this war on the streets of New York City and Chicago and San Francisco by convincing the American public, how futile it is." And so I'm really grateful to these two college students for keeping us in mind.
And Kent, are you able to get that bracelet?
Not really.
Okay, so we'll
But
do
I'll have macro photography of it.
Okay, we'll
And then
we'll do an insert of it then.
his son wearing it.
Yes. Could you tell the story about when you discovered your son on that? Because we have a photo of.
Yeah. Well, as you can imagine, it was a pretty happy day to reunite with my family. And as I recall, on the way back, I bought some fishing equipment to go fishing with my son. And my wife and son were living in a suburb of San Diego called La Jolla. And so it was pretty exciting coming back and being with them. And the photograph you're referring to is of my son who's greeting me, and he's got one of these bracelets. And so it's pretty touching.
Beautiful. Is there anything else, Bob, that you would, let's see. What's this rescue bus and chair?
Oh, the bosun's chair. I don't know if that's a story or not. There's a photograph of you in a bosun's chair.
Okay, well, I can handle that kind of quickly. I had the misfortune 10 years before my imprisonment to be flying over the Mediterranean Sea at night off an aircraft carrier, and unfortunately the hook on the back of the airplane malfunctioned, and so I tried to get some fuel from a tanker, and the tanker had a malfunction, and I couldn't get any fuel, and so the third strike was I was supposed to fly it into the big tennis net that we call the barricade, and they had a malfunction on the aircraft carrier, so I couldn't get it into there. So it just wasn't my night, so my commanding officer said, "You're going to have to jump," so I ejected, and everything's supposed to be automatic with the chute opening on its own, and it didn't, the fourth failure, and so I fell about 2,000 feet, and then finally tried to pull the auxiliary way of opening the parachute, and that didn't work either until I finally tugged it all the way out, and it opened at about 2,000 feet. So it was an exciting night. a destroyer picked me up later on, pulled alongside the aircraft carrier, and they shot a line across. And so I rode this chair from the destroyer over to the aircraft carrier, which was my home at the time. And as I came on there, my squadron mates are greeting me, and here's my roommate, who's got a weird sense of humor. He'd broken into my locker and stolen my Stetson hat and my cowboy boots, and I guess he'd written me off as a lost cause.
That's wonderful. Unless there's anything else that you would like to say or put in here, I think we're
Well, I think the only thing I'd say, and again, focused on the midshipmen, is I hope you get married, you find the right person to marry, and don't wait, 7 or 8 years like I did, because if you're married to the right person, it can make your life very blissful, and that was my good fortune in marrying a wife who at the time was a Canadian, has since become an American, but I'm very indebted to her for raising her son and establishing a home for me to return to. So never sell your spouse short.
wonderful. Wow, God, I'm so touched. So you want wood? Yeah, let's get the tapping real quick.
Oh, I see, okay.
Maybe you can think of something you'd like to tap.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. And then if you tell us what that is, we'll put it in subtitles.
Okay, well, I think I'll keep it just one word, like honor,
Sure.
maybe.
And then the other option too is that you looked at the list of who else we're gonna, if you wanted to tap something to George Coker, for instance, or anything like that, then I could have them tap something back, so whatever.
Okay.
If you, whatever you'd like to do.
Okay, so here's the wall, huh?
We're gonna
Give me
get
a second to rig it here.
Okay.
Can I get that sandbag from you, please? Is Alex out of your shot there?
Alex is out of my shot, yeah.
How does the wall look? Can you?
It needs to tilt more this way.
Yep. I was trying to minimize the hardware.
Yeah. It's better to get a little more broader to it, yeah.
How's that?
All right, that's good. Let me see.
So-
And,
Got it.
Pretty stable.
Yeah, it is,
actually.
yeah.
and-
Are you doing
and
anything? Do you think?
Bob, if you would show me where you'll tap, and can you lean toward it just a little?
Sure.
I cut.
Okay, about right here?
Yeah, that's great. You know what? Can we stick it up on something so that piece of hardware disappears higher? Put it on a box or something?
Yes.
Put it
So
down.
what
Put it-
about the grip that I had? That was more minimal because this is shadowing and everything else.
Yeah, both of them.
It'll be out of the picture if you put it down
Yeah.
here, wouldn't it?
If we could just raise it up, put that on a box, just the board so it's taller.
Is that out?
Yeah, that's out.
Let's see if that's pretty stable, sir.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll pick up the sound.
Okay, then angle it a little bit more clockwise.
Like
I
that?
think that'll work. Yeah, that's good.
If this falls, just run.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay, Bob, lean in as to where you're gonna tap. So
Okay.
I'm just gonna frame up.
You want to slate on this?
And tap a little higher, Bob, up there. Yeah, that's it. All right. And let me get that
Where's it tapping?
right there.
Okay.
All right. Okay, Kent, you ready?
Yes.
All right.
ready to go?
Go ahead. Yeah, we'll just put a force weight in there.
Speed on me.
Cut. Go ahead.
All right, Bob Shumaker taps. Take 4.
This is going to be a demonstration of the tap code. The tap code was our ability to communicate through thick concrete walls to prisoners in the other cell. And it was our lifesaver in that it allowed us to refute all the brainwashing that the Vietnamese tried to get us to buy into. And the way you would know that there was an American, not a Vietnamese, on the other side of the wall was we would tap shave and a haircut, 2 bits. That's something that was very common to my generation. It sounds like this. and then the answer from the other side would be. So we knew there was an American there. And so I'm going to send a word, and it's going to be honor, Honor. And the H is in the third row and the second line. So it sounds like this. I'm sorry, I had a typo on the thing. That's O. N is in the third row, third column. O again, the fourth row, third column. No, I take it at 3, 4. And R is the fourth row, second column. So that spells honor. I'm a little rusty after 50 years. But we used it so much that our knuckles would sometimes have calluses on it. And we would often try to keep the noise very low by putting our cup against the wall and tapping, and that would kind of amplify the noise coming in the other direction. And it also allowed us to keep our eyes focused on shadows that might appear underneath our door sill, which would signify that a guard was about to pop open the hatch and catch us communicating. And the Vietnamese were very serious about preventing us from communicating, and in fact, they killed one of my cellmates later when they caught him communicating.
Beautiful. Let's cut. I'm going to cut.